All right, can you
and do the video.
let me see what I got to do there. Let's see, speaker. Oh, wait, speak
All right, great.
mute. Okay, I got my speaker, I got my mic, and I got my video, so we're good.
Very good. Well, I'm joined with Shawn Baker, Dr. Shawn Baker. I first saw you on Joe Rogan's podcast as well as the Stone Cold podcast, and looks like you've become quite a sensation there on social media for your cause for recommending the carnivore diet. And I wanted to dive into it, the kind of the implications of the diet, where it's going on the science, what you're seeing anecdotally with the success stories. Uh, my program, A Neighbor's Choice, is primarily focused on politics and culture. However, I also explore themes of challenging groupthink, challenging foundations of consensus, which consensus is good, but it should always have challenges when anomalies pop up that defy the reigning paradigm in a way that is significant. Um, so one of the things that I notice in politics is the obsession with one size fits all dietary nutrition guidelines like the food pyramid, right? And I think the food pyramid has failed us. Why do you think the food pyramid has failed us? Do you have any ideas on why it
Yeah, I
got
mean,
it so wrong?
I think the basic premise of trying to do a general population recommendation in the first place is very difficult. It's very challenging. We have to realize that unfortunately, as other people have pointed out, a lot of the information which the food pyramid is based on is, not really grounded in very particularly compelling evidence. There are commercial interests and even some activism interests that gets into those guidelines, and so we have to look at what they are as far as a overall assessment of what we know about nutrition. We've made a lot of assumptions about nutrition based on observations that don't necessarily always hold up. The very fact that to say that we've always eaten a grain-based agrarian type diet, which we have for 10,000 years, but again, the human species is about 3 million years old, and so when we start with the basic premise that we all should be eating food that comes off the farm and eating lots of corn and wheat and soy and that sort of stuff. That doesn't really line up with our, with our human physiology and our human evolution and biology. And so those very basic assumptions kind of undermine the food guidelines to start with. And I think one of the things we're seeing with this carnivore movement very dramatically is that when you base your nutrition and health on a carnivorous or a highly carnivorous diet, that we're seeing people just get extremely healthy. And I think that is something that goes flies 100%, 180 degrees against what we're being told, at least that we've been told for the last 50 to 100 years. And I think that's something that I think is highly interesting to me. It's changing a lot of people's lives, and like you said, the social media experiment, the social media popularity is something that is uh, again a new phenomenon, and it's only now in the last few years that can really even happen. And so now we're seeing these good results being replicated by the thousands and more so every day. And I think that's something that really challenges all the paradigms. As far as you talk about how do we get our information, how is it disseminated. We sort of wait on these institutions to tell us what to do, whether it's how to live, how to eat, what to buy, so on and so forth. And now we've got people that are kind of going around that system and figuring it out for themselves. And I think while there's a lot of potential error in that, there's also a lot of potential uh, good things that are coming out. And I think the carnivore diet, and it doesn't have to be 100% carnivore for many people, but I think finding that out is something that is extremely, extremely helpful for many people.
Now, I've heard some people say that that dieting meats, heavy meat diet can increase aggression. Have you heard anything about that? Is there anything to that? Is that just one of those myths that you hear floated out?
Well, I mean, I think it probably helps with hormone support. One of the hormones we have is testosterone, and testosterone obviously has some relationship to aggression. But I don't think we're seeing. I think if anything, most people find on the whole that their mood is pretty stabilized. They're very calm. What I do see is people uh, getting rid of things like anxiety, getting rid of things like depression, and probably some of the anger and frustration that goes with that because they just feel better. I think the nutrition is better, and so I don't think we're seeing a bunch of people, you know, going out there and being aggressive or violent. I do think people are feeling things like libido improving. People are, I think, they're functioning better overall. I think they're functioning as they should. And, I mean, certainly we're seeing a lot of men and women saying they're getting stronger, they're putting on muscle, and those things are related to good hormone function. But I don't necessarily know that aggression is an issue. I know back, for a long time, hundreds of years more, some of the religious organizations were against red meat because they knew they increased uh, sort of sexuality or lustfulness. And so they tried to banish red meat from the diet. And it's one of the reasons the cereal industry was founded, because they wanted to sort of thwart, the lustfulness of women and men. And so they took red meat out of the diet. But I have not seen people being aggressive, but I have seen people, I think, functioning better.
I think that there's a sense in which people, I guess, anecdotally, they'll watch their dogs eat, raw meat, and they see them snarling a lot more than when they eat their kibbles and bits. So maybe maybe that's a good thing. I don't know if it's bringing the wolf back out of them instead of the Dutchman. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean that's that's an animal wanting to survive. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just a survival thing. And I think any of us, if our survival is in jeopardy, we're going to fight, or we should want to
So
fight.
maybe they're snarling and getting violent around raw meat because they're like, finally, I get to eat food for the first time instead of this kibbles and bits.
Well, exactly right. Yeah,
They're starved.
They know what's up. They'll defend it. That's what they're. The dogs are basically just basically wolves that have been kind of hybridized a little bit and bred down a little bit, and so they are. That's their food. That's
Yeah.
what they should. That's what they're supposed to eat.
Now, how long have you been on the carnivore diet now?
About 21 months.
Okay.
I think I'm in my 21st month. I think in what are we in? Almost, well, July. Yeah, about 21 months now. So I started late 2016.
And what was the trigger point that made you get into that diet change?
Yeah, I mean, just some curiosity about reading about it, and just a desire more out of anything, just for performance. I'm a pretty competitive athlete, and so I wanted just to see if it would give me a performance advantage, and pleasantly surprised to find that it gave me a pretty significant boost in performance. So that was my main goal. There were a number of minor health things that also were going on that I wanted to see if those would be addressed.
Daddy, can I please have some milk, Daddy?
Yes.
Yeah, so you were saying that you were trying to correct some underlying health issues as well with this, and did it have some improvement?
Yeah, I mean, I'd already gone through a 4 or 5 year journey on nutrition, with going from, kind of a more standard diet, and not even a junky diet, just a relatively healthy diet, but it included all the things we're supposed to eat: the cereals, the grains, low fat, protein, the lean, the skim milk, and the fruits and vegetables, and a little bit of junk. But generally, I ate pretty well. But that wasn't doing me well when I was in my mid 40s. I was having issues of metabolic syndrome, insulin resistance. I was carrying more weight than I needed to. I still a very competitive athlete, training very hard. I mean, I'm still training very hard. I'd always, up until then, I told myself, as long as I work out hard, I'll eat dessert. I'll eat dessert first because I deserve it, and I'm training hard. But that caught up to me in my mid 40s, and so I went through this transition of about 5 years where I went through low fat diets to paleo diets to low carb diets to ketogenic diets for a couple of years, and finally before landing on a carnivorous diet. And throughout that transition, I noticed, as I first lost weight, I felt healthier. And then as I got into more of a ketogenic diet, I saw some joint pain and stuff like that going away that I accumulated over the years of being an athlete. And then finally on a carnivorous diet, pretty much all my joint pain pretty much went away, even stuff that had been bothering me for 20 years, which was quite shocking to me. And then I just saw improvements in things like skin and things like sleep quality, libido, and then I certainly saw improvements in strength and body composition, and then overall endurance, recovery, and just overall performance.
Now, one of the things that I've heard whenever I've done a very low-carb diet is someone will say, well, what about your kidneys? You're going to hurt your kidneys. As a doctor, what have you seen in that that
Yeah, I
issue.
mean that's unfortunately that's kind of a myth. It's based really on no evidence. We did a nice podcast with Dr. Ted Naiman. We went into that on our Human Performance Outliers podcast the other day. But yeah, there's no real good evidence showing that protein harms kidneys, and certainly meat falls into that category. We've kind of conflated the fact that when kidneys are damaged, they spill protein, but it's not the protein that's causing the damage. It's just associated with it. It's kind of like the same issues we're having with heart disease and cholesterol to some degree, where cholesterol is associated with it, but is not necessarily directly causing it, or at least not the sole contributor. But yeah, there is really no good evidence that protein causes kidney damage. And even in folks that have compromised renal function or kidney function, there's still no good evidence to show that restricting protein helps with that. In fact, I have seen on a number of occasions now people that have kidney impairment recover some of that damage on a carnivorous diet. And so, again, we've got so many sort of myths and things that have misled us over the years.
Some of the people in the keto community will say, be careful about eating a high protein diet because a lot of that will be converted into glucose. Do you find that as a problem that you have to watch out for on a carnivorous diet? That if you eat too much, you're going to get too much glucose in the blood that you don't really want?
Yeah, I think that is another thing that's being tested. And, the results of people doing this generally show they maintain relatively lower levels of glucose. Certainly their insulin sensitivity improves. We see, like I'm an example of that in an outlier. In high-level athletes, we'll see elevations in glucose, perhaps due to gluconeogenesis. But gluconeogenesis is where that is the process by which the body converts protein and then occasionally fat into glucose, and that is something that is generally a demand-driven process. It's not a supply-driven process, and so the body just doesn't make extra glucose for the heck of it, only if it's in demand. And so we're not really seeing that as a side effect of this. And so I think the other thing is you got to remember that a carnivorous diet, if you're eating meat, in general, it's not necessarily a high-protein diet calorically. It's still a relatively higher fat diet. Most people will eat, 60-70% of their calories will come from fat if you just eat meat. And so you just have to remember meat comes with a lot of fat in it. Even a lean animal still has quite a bit of fat on there when we look at the caloric considerations. And so it's a higher protein than the average American eats by far, but it is not a high percentage-wise protein diet relative to what you might think. It's not like it's a 90% protein diet. I mean, that is something that's really not something humans are designed to do. If we look at evolutionary biology, paleoanthropology on what humans ate, it's very likely we ate a diet that was about 35 to 40% protein in content as we evolved, and that's probably what humans are well adapted to, and that's pretty much what a carnivorous diet puts you at.
Now, do you supplement with MCT oil or that type of oil for fat content?
No, I don't. I think that's quite honestly, that's kind of a waste of money and a waste of time for most people. I think the MCT oil doesn't really serve much purpose other than add a bunch of energy in your body that you don't necessarily need. It's very devoid of much nutrition. It's just it's a bolus of fat that doesn't really do much for you. There's maybe special circumstances where people might utilize it for certain disease conditions, but in general, I think it's probably better just to get your fat content just from food. And it's the best. Get a ribeye steak, get a piece of brisket or something like that. Get a fatty piece of fish, and you're gonna be far better served doing that than trying to drink oil or pour a bunch of butter in your coffee or do something like that. It's not. Again, I am very heavily influenced by what I think happens in nature, and what happens in our human evolution. And we weren't out there measuring ketones. We weren't out there putting butter in our coffee. We weren't even drinking coffee, quite honestly. We certainly weren't, processing coconuts to make MCT oil. And so, again, if you go back to what humans came from and you get close to that, good things tend to happen. And I think, again, meat in general has so much nutrition. It is the most highly bioavailable concentrated source of nutrition that you can get. The human body is well designed to deal with that, and the more of it you give the body, the better your body's going to act.
Isn't it true that like grass-fed beef liver has more nutrients density than any other fruit or vegetable you could eat, right?
Yeah, I mean it's
liver?
Yeah, I mean, you certainly look at the organ meats, but even just the regular cuts of steak are still going to be extremely higher in nutrient density, and particularly when we address things like bioavailability and the appropriateness of the nutrient. A lot of the plant-based nutrients are not in the correct isoforms. Vitamin A is one particular one where everybody likes to talk about beta carotene versus retinol, and so the food that comes in plants has to be processed. Sometimes it's very hard to extract. There are a lot of anti-nutrients. Things like fiber prevent the absorption of a lot of those nutrients. And so what happens is you have to eat a heck of a lot more plant food just to be able to extract even a fraction of the nutrition that you get in animal-based food. And you're absolutely right. Liver is an incredibly dense source of nutrition, as is just meat in general.
Now, a lot of people have said now the only way to do this healthily is to eat only organic, grass-fed, and that kind of thing. Is that essential to do this in a long-term healthy way? Or, I mean, basically, if you want to do a carnivorous diet with maximum long-term health in mind, is it essential that you get off of conventionally grain-fed meat? And or is that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is something that, it's nice to sort of, I think we have to separate ethics and we have to separate our sort of environmental agenda from human health. I don't think I can point to any clear evidence from human studies, and there have been a few studies comparing grain-finished and grass-finished showing one to be superior over the other. Texas A&M University did a study looking at grass-fed versus grain-fed animals, looking at biomarkers like lipoproteins, cholesterol, and blood pressure, and they saw that the grain-fed was almost identical to the grass-fed. In fact, the grain-fed was a little bit better in that regard. But, I mean, there might be a slight difference for some people, but I would in no way say it's essential to do that. I've looked at thousands of people doing this and asked them, are you seeing remarkable improvements in health? And if so, what kind of meat are you using? And 80% of the people said grain-fed and 20% of the people said grass-finished. And so I can't point to definitive evidence showing one superior than the other. I do acknowledge that there may be some environmental impacts that might be beneficial to do that. But again, to say it's essential, I can't say that.
Yeah,
it'd be nice to say so, but
yeah,
it's not.
I'm primarily focused in this context on the health benefits. I've heard some people say, well, if you're trying to avoid the dangers of grains and the phytic acid and all the junk that's in grains, when the grain-fed animal is consuming that voluminously, it gets stored, all those toxins and things get stored in the fat. So when you eat grain-fed fat, you're getting a distilled form of all the junk you're trying to avoid by cutting out grains. Is there anything to that in science or no? I mean,
that is purely speculative. I don't see any evidence that that's true the case. And you got to think about this. The cows eat grass too. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of substances in grass that we don't need to eat. If humans were to sit there and eat a bunch of grass, you would get sick because there are things in the human body that grass provides. And so if that were the case with the grains, it would be the same case with grass. The cows have this is why ruminant animals, when I mean ruminant animals, those are the animals with multiple stomach compartments like cows and sheep and other animals, and a lot of game meat like elk and stuff like that we eat, are so efficient at detoxifying that stuff. They're set up for that. So those things don't really show up in the animal's meat. Now, some of the pesticide residues might show up to some degree, but again, there's no clear evidence showing that that's harmful for the human. But as far as saying grain versus grass, and you're worried about some product in the grain being harmful for the cows can show up in the meat, you might as well just be worried about the grass as well, because humans are not as well. Humans are more, we have more people eating grains than we have people eating grass, and so if you're going to make the argument that humans shouldn't eat grains, I would also make the argument that humans should not eat grass either. Mm-hmm. And that's why we have the animals that process that stuff ahead of us.
So there's no real substantive evidence that sick, obese cows will make you sick if you're eating large portions of them on a long-term basis. There's no evidence of that in scientific literature.
I mean, yeah, I can't point to a study that said if you ate a diabetic cow, it would somehow make you sick. I mean, that evidence just doesn't exist. Now, it's speculative, and certainly, if you think about it in the wild, what animals usually get culled and eaten by other animals?
It's the sicker ones, yeah.
The sicker, the weaker, the older ones. And so that is how things typically work. And so, again, it makes for a nice narrative, but you have to base things in what we know and what's factual. And I have not seen any evidence that shows that even eating a diabetic cow would get me sick. Now, if a cow has an infection and you're eating heavily bacterially contaminated meat, then certainly you can get an infection. But an obese cow, a fat cow, is not necessarily a cow that's going to make you sick. Now, I mean, our human ancestors preferentially sought out the fattest animals they could find because they knew that fat was something that gave them energy. That's why we preferentially chose the big fat animals, the megafauna like the elephants and mammoths and the sloths and the glyptodons and the other animals until they went extinct. And then we were forced to eat leaner animals like, the oryx and the cows, or the cows we bred, but the deer and stuff like that. And so saying an animal is fat is not necessarily going to give you illness to eating that. Now, again, is there some toxins from pesticides residue that might be an issue? That might be an issue, but again, I've not seen any concrete, hardcore evidence that shows that. And again, having seen thousands of people do this diet, eating grain-fed beef, eating stuff you can get from the supermarket, I'm not seeing people getting sick.
So you're not really seeing much of a health difference if you switch to grass-fed organic only. It's because it seems like a very cost prohibitive thing for people to try to eat grass-fed organic only. It's just so expensive. You look at those average supermarkets and the steak $17 for a tiny piece of grass-fed beef, and you're like, man, there's no way I can do this, on a daily basis. So that's a good thing to know for people, because a lot of people look at that and they say, I can't do it if it's got to be organic grass-fed,
Yeah, I mean, I think for a general recommendation, I think no, it's not required. Now, there are some individuals out there that will say, I feel better on grass-finished beef, and I think that's fine. You kind of have to see where you fall. There are equally people say, I feel better eating grain-finished beef. So I can't make a blanket general statement about that. As far as human health. Now, again, we have to separate human health from environmental concerns and so on and so forth. And I agree, it can be cost prohibitive. I buy my stuff on sale and I bulk up. I buy it in bulk and I freeze the stuff, and that makes it where I can eat for $5 a pound and eat steaks. And I think I'm very fortunate to be able to do that.
Have you looked into the deuterium issue that I've heard some people talk about, how the deuterium is found in plant-based foods and you don't find it as much in meat, and therefore if you want to avoid having too much deuterium in your body, you should eat meat only as much as possible? Have you heard anything?
I have not. I know there's a fellow named Dr. Jack Cruz who's a big proponent of that particular issue, and I'm actually, maybe we'll talk to him on our podcast in the coming future, but I've not really delved into deuterium. I got to tell you, I mean, I try to keep things as simple as possible. I just think nutrition should be simple, and we have so much sort of little minor details that people worry about needlessly, in my mind, and it drives them crazy, and it's very anxiety provoking, and people are worried about methionine, glycine ratios, and this and that, and every little thing. I'm like, just relax, enjoy your damn steak, and it'll take care of itself. But it's fun to talk about that stuff sometimes. But I mean, honestly, when the rubber meets the road, man, it seems like just eat like you're designed to eat, and the stuff will take care of itself. And so, but yeah, maybe like I said, I'll get Jack Cruz on our podcast and we'll chat with him.
Well, I think
go through some of that stuff.
It might be a piece of evidence in the quiver of the argument, though, because I do interviews with different scientists in different fields, and I've talked to people who are in doing experiments on low temperature nuclear reactions in chemical labs, and they're using heavy deuterium water, to create a lot of heat, excess heat. And I thought, if inflammation is the key to a lot of the chronic illnesses that people are plagued with, it may be because of the presence of deuterium that's in non-meat food. That might be a key issue that's causing, inflammation, excess heat in the body, which causes unstable structures to develop. So
I mean certainly that could be. I mean, there's a lot of stuff we don't know. I mean, we look at stuff down at the mitochondrial level and so on and so forth, and so we've got a lot of again, the science is still emerging. I'm of the position that, we know some stuff, but we know very little overall, as far as what things impact the human body to the extent that we pretend we do. And I think we've been studying cholesterol for, 60 years or something like that, and we still don't understand. How much do we know? I think, it needs to be explored. It's fun to do that. But again, does it ultimately change what I'm going to do or recommend? Not necessarily. I think, ultimately you got to look what goes into the human body and what the result is. And right now, well, I'm seeing that eating a fully carnivorous or a heavily carnivorous diet results in very good outcomes so far. So,
do you kind of have a green light for all meats? Seafood, duck, all that kind of variety, or do you tend to steer people towards beef only, or what do you recommend?
No, I think in general, any whole animal cut of meat, and when I say that, I mean, I think that any animal is kind of fine for people to enjoy. I will say that as people do this over longer periods of time, they often will self-select towards ruminant animals, which would be things like beef and lamb, and maybe some game meats like elk and stuff like that, because I just feel that is closer from a nutrition standpoint to being more complete. And I think things like chicken in particular seem to be less satisfying for most people. I think fish is fine. Any of those are fine. I think heavily processed, and when I mean processed, I mean things that are like cut with other things. A lot of the sausages and lunch meats and stuff like that often come with a lot of things that probably we do better not eating a lot. So even things like bacon, I would say those things I wouldn't feature heavily. I would stick to things like ground beef, steaks, fish, chicken, stuff like that if possible. And again, I think when we talk about how animals are raised, I think the ruminant animals have the most capacity to deal with, eating stuff that we think maybe not be the best. I know that cows will eat a lot of human waste, human agricultural waste. We grow a lot of crops, and then we give the non-edible parts to the cows. And otherwise, when you look at the data for a cow, even a conventionally raised cow, 86% of what they eat is stuff that humans could never eat, whether it's grass or whether it's just the parts of the plants. Like we may pluck off the soybeans and extract the oil and then give the cows the refuse and stuff that we can't eat generally. Or, we may take parts of other plants, the stems and the leaves from other fruits and vegetables that we can't eat, and we give those to cows. And so, but they have a better system of detoxifying and dealing with that stuff relative to things like chickens and even pigs. And the pigs are monogastric organisms, and I think they do a little better. So I think when you're worried about how was the animal fed and raised, I think it's probably more important to consider that with regard to chickens and eggs and pigs and stuff like that.
So you typically try to avoid chicken and pork meat, that kind of thing, as a regular.
I don't really go out of my way to necessarily avoid it. I just don't prefer it. So I wouldn't say I'm scared to eat chicken or anything like that. I find that and there are some arguments for chickens having much greater levels of omega-6 and the issues with how they're raised and what shows up in their meat. So I just find them not very satisfying for me. I mean, the last time I had any chicken was over a year ago, and I was at a barbecue in France, and they ran out of lamb, and so I was eating some chicken, and I just remember sitting there eating it and eating, going, I'm not getting full, I'm not getting satisfied. And so I think that's more of that than anything else.
And again, supplements and herbs are not really necessary on a carnivore diet, you found, right? You don't really need herbal supplements or enhancements.
Yeah,
to.
I haven't found that to be the case personally, and I haven't found that to be the case for the majority of the people. There are some people that, in certain situations, they may find that they might need an electrolyte supplement during the beginning, particularly as they transition, as there's quite a bit of fluid and electrolyte shifts. Some people will say this particular herb or something like that may benefit them, as a general rule, I'd say it doesn't seem to be the case. There's a lot of we have a lot of sort of acculturation that we need to have. We need to have a pill or we need to have a supplement, and we have this belief system that we need to continually add stuff to our diet to improve our health or our quality of life, when really we probably just need to get rid of more crap out of our diet, and that's ultimately what works well. So I am not a big proponent of supplementation. I'm not completely against it in certain situations, but I'm not going to sit there and tell people that you must supplement with this. You might find that, in some cases, and generally, again, people that have done this for many years, the vast majority of them don't supplement anything. They find that they just don't need that stuff, and it becomes an unnecessary expense.
What about pregnant women and children? Is that something that they can do, carnivore diet, or?
Sure. I mean, I don't see any contraindications to that. I mean, there's lots of pregnant women that have had pregnancies and nursed babies, and and this is going back even through other cultures that we know of. And I don't see any reason that they couldn't do that. Now, if you're pregnant or nursing, you should involve your obstetrician, so that they're aware of that. They may consider things like folate supplementation. Well, then again, the evidence isn't clear, but I mean, just to be on the safe side, perhaps. But I don't see a reason that I would dissuade anybody from doing that. Now, maybe in the middle of pregnancy, switching diets because it can be a little stressful. That may be an indication to kind of think about that. But the interesting thing is we've seen a lot of women who are basically infertile prior to the diet, and then they go on a carnivore diet, and suddenly their fertility comes back and they get pregnant right away, which I think is kind of interesting. So, but yeah, I don't see any contraindication to having kids and pregnant women eat a bunch of meat.
Yeah, that's what I see a lot of times is people will say, well, kids have to eat all the grains and all that stuff. And it seems like it's actually the opposite. You should get the kids started early on the cleanest diet possible, avoiding all that junk, the high carb and all that excess food.
Well, yeah, I mean, with kids, if you set them up, the patterns you develop in childhood and early adulthood tend to stick with you the rest of your life. That's what we know from watching how people do, and so it becomes very difficult to make that shift later in life because it becomes part of who you are, and so you have all these patterns of how you sort of deal with things. And a lot of times you deal with that with food. And so yeah, if you get kids started out on a young age eating sugar and grains, you set up that sort of roller coaster for them, and it's hard for them to get off of it. And we start with that out nowadays, even in utero. I mean, a lot of these children in utero are experiencing hyperglycemic issues and insulin issues during their development as a fetus, and then they come out of the womb, ready to go, primed for sugar. And the first thing we do is we feed them formula for a lot of these kids that aren't breastfed, and the formula often will have corn syrup and soybean oil as their first ingredients. And so we have these kids that start out that way from a young age, and it catches up for them very quickly. So yeah, I think if you get kids right away on my kids, they're not, they have carnivorous days. They all had meat. They all had steak for breakfast. I cooked them up on the grill, and they all ate that, and that's been their breakfast so far. And I try to say, look, you guys, this is your nutrition. Eat that. If you're still hungry and you want a banana or an apple, that's fine. But I keep the crap to an absolute minimum. They complain that I never let them have sugar. I tell them it's because I love them. But it's other people will they'll think the kids need a reward or need a treat, and I'll tell you, man, your kid is not going to love you anymore because they got fat and diabetic 20 years from down the road. That's not love. That's just passing a buck down the road. You don't have to give them a sugary treat. They're just as happy to get a piece of ribeye, I'll tell you. My kids will love it. They think it's a treat. They think it's special, and they're very happy and very lucky. And we're lucky to be able to do so.
Crab meat is so sweet, it's like a dessert too. If you want to have a little sweet something, that's not that bad for you, it seems.
Well, yeah, crab is fine. I say,
Yeah.
yeah, shellfish is wonderful. We had some mussels here. I'm up on Whidbey Island right now, and we went out for a bunch of mussels, and the kids loved them.
It
It's
seems
great stuff.
so. It seems like plants and mushrooms are really like a medicine that's a supplement on a little if you get sick or something, right? You don't. It's not something meant to be your a main source of nutrients. Is that kind of
Well,
the gist of
yeah,
what you're finding?
yeah. I mean, I think if I just would have put an overall sort of overall rule, I'd say meat is human food, and then the rest of the stuff, if you run out of meat, you can make do on some plant food. If it's not optimal, it's not ideal. There's issues with it. You can get some energy. There's some, obviously fruit has a lot of sugar in it. You've got to process a lot of stuff that maybe you're not well equipped to handle. But we can handle it some. Obviously, that's one of the reasons we survived as a species. Is we can do that. But meat is the optimal fuel. You can use plants in a medicinal way. I think there's certainly some utilization for that. And most medicines we have today were derived from plant concentrated compounds. And so I think that's been used traditionally. But if you think about your nutrition as being, animal based, and then using the plant sparingly, either as flavorings or enhancements or for medicinal things, I think you're going to fare pretty well.
So, what's success look like to you? I mean, obviously, the carnivore diet is catching fire on social media and YouTube, and I hope it can. If it's the healthiest, one of the healthiest ways you could eat, I hope it's something that's a long-term thing. So what does success look like to you? Let's say 5 years from now, do you have any benchmarks where you want to see this project of yours? Where do you want to see it? What's the big...
Well, yeah, I mean that's just an interesting question. I'm just kind of here along for the ride and doing what I can. I think that we're going to see more and more people acknowledging it as because the interesting thing is we have a lot of what we call idiopathic diseases, right? We don't know what's causing them. And I said, well, maybe it's some damn compound in a plant that's causing them. And I think no one has really sort of suggested that, because we've always said, fruits and vegetables are perfect for humans, and all humans just need to nonstop eat them continuously. And what we're seeing is things like autoimmune diseases and neurodegenerative diseases and stuff like that. Those things seem to be improving. So that's where I'd like to see at least some of this go, and people acknowledge that and use that as a accepted treatment option, because I think there are so many people that would benefit from that. I think that there are I'm not really that interested in weight loss, and I'm not really interested in athletic performance. I mean, from a general standpoint, I mean, personally, yes, it's important. I like that stuff, but really, I'd like to see it go towards this is becoming accepted from a medical standpoint, or just a population health standpoint. And then what we have to do is, if we can say this is a healthy thing and we need to continue to keep it in the human diet, then we have to figure out how to make it sustainable. And I think we have to not just because right now we're on a path where we're going to say, okay, in 30 years from now, there's going to be no more animal agriculture. We're going to get animals out of the diet. We're not going to eat them. We're going to do away with that. I think that's going to be a huge, huge mistake for humanity and for our continued survival of our species. And I think we have to accept that we are who we are. We can't change our biology. We can't change our evolution. At least we can't do that over the short term. And, maybe if we all become melded into computers and the singularity takes place, that stuff happens, that may be a different story. But assuming we're going to continue as human beings with human physiology, I think we have to recognize who we are, where we came from, and what we need to be to stay healthy, and then use our technology, use our smarts to make it sustainable. And whether that's lab-grown meat, which I'm highly, highly skeptical of, because we have to consider that these animals have been part of the environment for, tens of millions of years, if not longer, and the Earth really depends upon that, and our environment depends upon that. We have to figure out how to do that in a sustainable way. Regenerative agricultural techniques, how to mass scale that, because we can't. There's too many people to have everybody go to a family farm. It's too inefficient. You can't feed that many people, so you have to figure out a way to make it sustainable, healthy for the environment, and at the same time commercially viable. And I think that's going to be the challenge. And I think that's solvable, not by me. It's not my area of expertise, but I think we get to the people that know how to do that, we can make it happen.
Well, my work is featured at a lot of news sites like Daily Caller and Town Hall Finance, American Conservative, Foundation for Economic Education. These sites are people who are kind of independent alternative media outlets, and they're looking at big picture issues like how do we solve healthcare. And that's one of the things I like about your solution is, instead of fighting over how we're going to, centrally plan healthcare this way or that way, do we want a socialist model, a corporatist model? You're opening up a whole new paradigm of opportunity of hope for people to say, look, maybe we can actually do a lot of the health healing effects through proper diet and care for our bodies through avoiding the things that cause these chronic illnesses, right? And that's
I liken, I see people, particularly, in political parties, debating upon healthcare and how to fund it because it's so expensive. And to me, it's like arguing about the colors of the deck chairs on the Titanic as it's sinking. Like, you have got to stop creating so many sick people. Mm-hmm. We can't. We're going to drown because the number of sick people continues to increase. The expenses going into that. We have a diabetic epidemic. We have an obesity epidemic. We have a chronic disease epidemic. This will soon shift into an epidemic of Alzheimer's disease and dementia because that's what's going to follow. Those things are intrinsically linked, and that becomes incredibly expensive. What do you do when you have 20, 30, 40, 50 million people that are demented in your country that require 24-hour-a-day, around-the-clock care? We can't pay for it. It's too expensive. The families have to do that. The families have to quit their jobs to do that. And so we have got to stop creating so many sick people. The only way we can do that is to fix our nutrition, I think. Fix our lifestyle. Prevention is given no more than lip service. It's given a pittance of attention and funding, and it's biting us, and it's biting us in a big way. And until we recognize that and buy off on that in a huge way, completely change the paradigm how healthcare is delivered. I mean, it's healthcare is no longer healthcare; it's disease management, and we've got to get away from that. It should be health creation, and I think there's ways to do that, but it's big picture stuff, and it's going to take a lot of people that have the political will and the financial wherewithal to do that. But it's doable.
Well, very good. Well, hey, I've appreciated speaking with you. I best of luck in what you're doing to get the message out there. I know I've been doing the carnivore diet in the last few weeks, and I've noticed it's been very good. So I think that everyone should look into what you're saying and visit your website, shawn-baker.com. Any other projects or anything you'd like people to know about?
Well, I mean, I've got several little websites. Meatheals.com is an excellent one for people wanting to look at just hundreds and hundreds of testimonials of people that have had tremendous health improvements with a carnivorous diet. It's categorized by different medical issues, whether it's joint pain or depression, gastrointestinal issues, skin issues, autoimmune issues, so on and so forth, blood pressure, diabetes. All those things have been successfully improved via carnivorous diets. Obviously my social media, I'm very active on that. I interact with people quite a bit. I'll be writing a book on this stuff. It'll be coming out probably early next year, I think. I'm just trying to encourage people to be vocal and active in being proponents of taking back our health care because no one's going to do it for you. You've got to be your own advocate.
Well, very good. Thanks again, Dr. Shawn Baker, everyone. Check out his website, shawn-baker.com, and what was the meat site?
It's called meatheals.com.
Meatheals.com. Very good. Thanks a lot.
All right, man. Thanks, David.
Take care.